I should just sit down because it's pretty clear what he's saying, right? There's no need for any explanation. And it's pretty clear that most of us don't live this way, at least I don't all the time. But there's a time that will come when the show stops, right? In our own lives, personally, when we take that last breath. And I don't know if you think about this too often, but as we heard in the gospel today, when the end of the age comes, it actually feels a little, I'd rather not think about it. Let somebody else think about that, like, what does that mean? Like, what if it happened tomorrow? Would I be up or down, in or out, These are all these big existential faith questions that I don't know about you, but I tend to, I'll deal with that later, huh? Who wants to look at that stuff? But he's pretty clear about the field and the seeds and the wheat and the weeds. He makes no bones about it that every single one of us has to be accountable for how we live out our lives. And that does not mean that every one of us has to pitch a perfect game, because none of us does. I certainly don't, none of us does. But that we are responsible to look at our lives, and if we're younger, who we want to be when we grow up, what the difference is that we want to make in the lives of others and making this world a better place, helping other people, especially the poor and the vulnerable. And if we're older, kind of looking back, not too much, but looking at the now as we move into the future, because it's never too late to start, to say, what's my value in this world? And I don't mean value worth. God's eyes, we're all worthwhile and valuable. I mean, what am I doing? What difference have I made in the ways of this world? And it's pretty clear, he says, that there are people who are good and people who what? He uses the word, are evil. We see it out there. People who do random acts of violence, or worse, people who plot and really put the time and the energy into doing the things that are contrary to the gospel, which would be loving and taking care of people and feeding one another and not judging and all of that stuff that Jesus was about. So that's pretty clear, huh? What I want to do today is put a little uni spin on the gospel. So hang on, because we're going to spin away. And I just want to ask us to think about the weeds and the wheat in just a little different way. Not good people and evil people so much, but here's the spin. The weeds being the people that we as a society, oftentimes in our families, certainly in corporate America, even in our church at times, that the weeds are the people that we judge and cast off as being unacceptable. You with me? That's the little spin I want to have on how we're listening to who the weeds are. Who are those people? They're the people who are different from you and me. Whoever you and me is. It's someone with a different skin color. It's someone with a different religion, a different sexual orientation, a different language. It could be something as light and surface-oriented as a different look. It's someone who is deemed on some level unacceptable and unworthy. And the current tenor of discussion, and I use that word broadly, but a lot of the chatter that's out there, politically, societally, is that there are some people who are in and some people who are not. That some people are okay and deserving and other people are not. And that gets lived out day to day in policies that are made. Now, I am not qualified to talk about policies. I'm just an observer. I have some thoughts and feelings. They're pretty much on the surface level about something that is very complex and complicated and in many ways incendiary when it comes to how people feel about these issues. So before we jump in too much, I'm going to take us back to 1983. I was teaching high school. I was in the Catholic school system. I had not yet intended to move in the direction in which I now find myself, and you find yourself subjected to this morning. But I was in a classroom teaching English to these thugs in the North End, which is the Italian section of town for you folks who are visiting, and I loved it. And I remember going in there, and the Franciscan priest who was the principal, was a beautiful guy, Father Bob Caprio. I went in for the interview, and then it's crickets for a few weeks. I don't hear anything. And the reality was, I was 21 years old, and they were really looking for somebody who had a little bit of experience and who could kind of, corral these guys, as well as tell them what a noun and a verb and all these other things were. About 2 weeks before school starts, I get the call. Uni, we're going to hire you. I was so elated and excited that I didn't take the 2 seconds to realize I'm the bottom of the barrel for these guys. Like, I'm the 21-year-old kid fresh out of college. And so I came in, I was all excited, I couldn't wait, and I go in there, and I remember signing the contract, honest to God, and I'll never forget these numbers. I don't know what the numbers are now for coming out of school. I'm sure they're a little different from these, but I saw the numbers 10,527.00. For the year, not for the month, not for the half a year, for the year. 5 classes I was teaching. Some of these classes had 36 kids in them. From Charlestown and Dorchester and Southie and the North End and Hyde Park. It was unbelievable. And here comes little North Reading with his corduroy pants and his plaid shirt. Hi, how you doing? These kids, they were almost as old as I. They could grow more hair on their upper lip than I even dreamed of growing at that point. And I'm trying to teach them in this. Anyway, it was magic. It was the most unbelievable experience. It was fantastic. I loved it. I signed away. But then I realized, I got to make some money here. I had some loans, not to the degree that you guys have today, but I had some loans. I had my own bills. And I started landscaping all throughout college and high school. I said, I'll do that on the side. I'll come home from work. It was really interesting. In 3 hours, or whatever, I could spread 5 yards of mulch, bark mulch, for $150, as opposed to 5 days worth of teaching all these classes, trying to mold the minds of the future. I know I'm being very generous with myself, that that's what I was doing. And I was like, what's off here? And it's a good thing that the Lord is in charge and that the Spirit works, because I wasn't a landscaper for too long. I loved it. It's therapeutic. I still love it. But I got to tell you this story. The first year I'm landscaping, I decided I need to get all these lawns so that I can have a steady base of income. So weekly, I'll be cutting these lawns. That money will come in. And then as we grow, maybe have another crew, and then we'll do the design work, the bark mulch, the shrubs, the plantings, all this kind of stuff, right? But at least it'd be the steady income. And I remember getting one of my first lawns in the town next door in Linfield, which is this really nice town, And I pulled up to the lady's house, and it was this huge expanse of beautiful grass, beautifully manicured hemlocks and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, this is great, I'll get more. And I go and I start, and everything's going well. And all of a sudden, a few weeks into the summer, that pristine, green, weed-free lawn started to sprout a few things that didn't look like the nice sod grass that had been laid whenever. And I watched those little green leaves start to emerge, these prickly little leaves, and then I saw this little shoot come up. And you remember those shoots when we were kids? It would come up, and it was tight, and then it would open up, and it was gray and fuzzy, and you'd go like this. Remember those things? What are they called? They're worse than rabbits. I'm telling you right now, they proliferated throughout the whole yard. The lady calls, and I remember saying, I think it's too late, because she canned the landscaper before me, who should have put on a pre-emergent so that those things would never have germinated, right, and emerged. I said, let's go through the season, and then next spring, before they even emerge, we'll do it. No, she wanted them out. They have this spray, you can go and spot. I said, I know, but it's not good. Who's always right? Yeah, that's not true. I went there one day and I spot sprayed every darn dandelion going. A week and a half later, I come back. Can you imagine what this beautiful lawn looked like? Awful. It had dead white spots, yellow white spot, like throughout the whole thing. It was like a plague hit the lawn. I pulled up, I should have just kept going. She was very upset. This woman, and I tried to explain, we never should have done it. We should have let the dandelions grow up with the fescue and deal with it at harvest time. She obviously never read this gospel, and I didn't have it down pat at the time, huh? There is something to letting the weeds and the wheat grow together. It's a little humorous, I hope, about the landscaping example, but look what the result was. It was a disaster. And that was the one and only summer that I cut that lady's lawn. But it was her fault. Anyway, how does that translate into life today? Not about lawns, but about us, people. To let the weeds and the wheat, and remember I said the weeds, the people who are different from us, who seem to be the least desirable and acceptable, who haven't passed the litmus test of who's able to be in and stay in and who's not. How do you and I see and judge one another, especially in our differences, wheat and weeds alike? Jesus says, let them grow together. It is not for us to judge. We're not the harvesters. The angels will come and take care of that at the end time. We're called to somehow work and be with one another in the process. This past week, we just got back from our Young Neighbors in Action service trip with our high school kids, and we were in San Diego. And I apologize for the picture on the cover of the bulletin. It was a nice group photo. I thought, don't look at it now, please, but I just thought it was this nice, great photo. Little did I realize we're on a service trip with the poor and the vulnerable and the needy. And of course, we take the group picture in front of the Hotel Del Coronado in San Diego. It was just a total, I just want to put the disclaimer out there. It was on our rec night. We had gone to the beach. The sun was in the right thing, and I'm sorry. Next week, all the pictures of these kids working hard, doing their service, and being with the folks in San Diego. I promise those will be up there. They're downstairs when you come down for coffee afterwards. They're downstairs up on the video, but I'm sorry, that was my mistake on that. But anyway. But our kids were with the weeds. They were in 4 different sites this week. Some of our kids were literally under the bridge. Have you ever been out there, San Diego? Like there's a big bridge that goes out to this island, Coronado Island. It's a beautiful, beautiful bridge. It's like a highway on the bridge. But right underneath it, you would never know, before you get to the water, there are all these warehouses. And all of this like clandestine gospel work, without the G word even being there, is taking place. People are taking food that stores are getting rid of, and they're getting rid of the rotten stuff, and they're packaging it in these ways that makes it appealing because it's salvageable. And then from there, those boxes, it goes to Catholic Charities. And then the kids, the lady was writing all this stuff down on a register, old school. The kids put it into a database. They gave people these ID cards. It was all done with such dignity and beauty. And then these people, the working poor who are working 2 and 3 jobs and still not what? Making it, are coming for this food. I watched our kids interact. I watched them not just throw food around, but this is stuff that's coming to people and going to be on their table. Other kids went to a place called Father Joe's Villages. I'm on the board of Pine Street, you know that. Pine Street does unbelievable good work. It lives out the gospel without using any religious language for the folks who are homeless, providing not just shelter, but a place to live, the dignity of a place to live, education, counseling. This place in San Diego makes Pine Street Inn look like it's an amateur show. It is Pine Street on steroids. Listen to these numbers. I don't know if this means anything to you. In a 4 square block area, not huge city blocks either, there are 10,000 homeless people currently living in a 4 square block area. A block and a half away, Petco Park. Who plays there? Padres, right? Those tickets aren't cheap. And now all around this 4 square block area, these buildings are going up. State-of-the-art, indoor skydiving, the Mission Brewery. It's all this cool stuff. It's the same thing that's going on here in the South End. And it's beginning to be the clash of the cultures, the mixing of the weed and the wheat and the weeds. And I watched our kids with great dignity serve people. It upheld the people's dignity who are coming through a line. Who has to go through a line for food or receive food? I told you, I experienced that when I was in high school, going to that pantry. It is not a comfortable thing to have to do. And this is the day in, day out existence. Another group was with developmentally disabled adults. And do you know in California, when somebody who has any kind of a mental disability turns 18, they are not just kicked out onto the street. The state takes care of them financially. In California, I mean, I think we got to talk to the governor, the mayor, whoever makes these rules, like the legislature, about this kind of stuff. And so they are all not just out on the street. There are so many others out on the street. But if you're developmentally disabled, your health care is taken care of by the state. There's dignity in that. Our kids interacted with these weeds, these throwaways who are useless by so many in society standards. The weeds and the wheat, the times we mess up, our sins, all the good stuff we do. How do we live more wholly, in a more integrated way, with ourselves and with each other? I know immigration is a huge issue in our country. Healthcare, a huge issue in our country. I will say it again, I shouldn't even be talking about it except to the degree that I am, and it will only be this much because I'm not smart enough to know about it. But I'm starting to wonder, are there any smart people out there who know about it, who are in positions of power? And I say that honestly. Because there are smart people out there who do know about these things and the intricacies and the complexities of these. And the biggest thing about this week with our kids is that in Catholic social teaching, and if we're all Catholic Christians, it's the bedrock and the foundation of what we believe in our own church's teaching. It says that every single human being has dignity. It's called the life and the dignity of the human person. That's the bedrock foundation from which all the other good works come. And I think sometimes we lose that sense because we think that the weeds aren't worth it. You didn't come in the country the right way. You're taking all our jobs that you're not even going to do, by the way. You've got a different skin color. You haven't learned the language. My parents, grandparents, great-parents came in from England and not England, Italy, let's say, Poland, like all these places that don't, they learn the English language. I heard myself saying that years ago. We all should just learn English. And maybe we all should learn English. But until we all learn it and know it, how do we meet people who are different? How do the weeds and the wheat interact? They're just sensitive questions about a very complex issue. And then with healthcare, you know, I don't know enough about it. I don't know if the Affordable Health Care Act was working or not. It was for some, and it wasn't for others. It made sense for some, it made no sense for others. And as a new administration comes in, my hope would be that you look at where it's broken and fix those things. But I don't get that sense. I get that sense that it's out with the old, in with the new, and now the new's not coming in, and what are we left with? People, forget policies and people who are being discarded. There's no dignity, and now 22 million people having no coverage. And yet there were problems with the system. How do we look at these things? That's why that second reading was so meaningful today, because we have to call on the Holy Spirit that will show us how to pray. In other words, it will help us in our weakness and guide us and help us to see what the right thing to do is as we try to follow this gospel, the weeds and the wheat together. And so I leave us with a couple of questions, macro, micro, just to stir things up, and not in an incendiary way, to stir things up within us like, what do I think about this? How do I view this? Have I even ever thought about this? Does this affect me or not? Number one, how do you and I see people who are different from us? Is there an initial judgment that comes up in all those ways that I mentioned earlier? Anyone who's different in any way. Do we tend to segment and box and pinpoint and judge people on that level? Is it an unconscious thing? Or worse, is it conscious? It's something for us to look at, something for me to look at. Number two, with the complexity of those two issues that I mentioned, healthcare and immigration, very complex things. No easy answer. How important is it for us to not lose sight of the decisions that we're making affect real live human people, and that every single person has dignity in God's eyes, and that as Catholic Christians we profess that the poor and the vulnerable have some sort of preferential option. God doesn't love the poor and the vulnerable more than he loves any of us, but there is some preference to those people. How do we feel about that? How's that sitting on us right now? It might be an uncomfortable place, or it might be firing us up. But where are we at with that? And then lastly, with those things that are within each one of us that we like, that we're happy about, that we're thankful to God about, let's call it the wheat within each of us. How do we look at the weeds in our lives? The stuff that we don't like about ourselves. The stuff that we say or do that afterwards, upon reflection, we're like, why did I say that? Why did I do this? I hate when I do that. How do you and I deal with the wheat and the weeds within us? Because I believe the more gentle and understanding we are with ourselves on that level, letting the Holy Spirit, letting the harvester, letting Jesus do the judging, the more gentle, accepting, loving, and understanding we will be with those that we perceive as weeds in our society.